Similar to yesterday, today we're going to start with a little bit of review. The first review I'm going to ask you to do is this first simplify problem. It's asking you to multiply 5x minus 2 by 5x plus 2. Push pause, do that multiplication, and then when you're ready to check your work against mine, push play. If you need to push pause again so that you have time to check your work, go ahead. The second review problem I'm going to ask you to do today is to factor. Off on the right, you see that there's a polynomial with 4 terms in it, which means you don't need to split the middle term because you already have 4 terms. Push pause, factor that problem, and when you're ready to check your work against mine, push play. If you need to push pause again in order to have time to check your work against mine, then do so. All right, we're asked to classify our answer to the first problem by degree and number of terms. So this is what you're being asked to classify. And then you're also being asked to classify the original polynomial that you were asked to factor by degree and number of terms. So this is what you're being asked to classify. Remember on yesterday's notes, we reviewed how to classify based on degree and number of terms, and we made a list of all the terms. I would try to do it without the list and see if you can answer. So push pause, try those 2 classifications, and then when you're ready to check your work against mine, push play again. So the first one is a quadratic binomial. Quadratic because it has a degree of 2, and binomial because it has 2 terms. The second one was a cubic polynomial in 4 terms. The highest degree we see is 3, and it has a total of 4 terms. All right, time to do some factoring practice. I'm going to do 3 of the problems with you today, and then 2 of the problems are going to be your homework for tonight. So let's start with 5x squared minus 20. When we look at this one, the first thing that jumps out at me is the 5 and the 20. Since one ends in 5 and one ends in 0, those are both divisible by 5. So I'm going to start by factoring out a 5 from both terms, because that's the GCF. Then it's time to solve the puzzle. Oh wait, it's not time to solve the puzzle. I only have 2 terms. We need 3 terms in order to do that. Okay, so I'm going to take that 5 and leave it on the outside of some big brackets. And I'm going to put that plus 0x in the middle, because it's pretty hard to split the middle term if you don't have a middle term. Those should have been big brackets, so I'm just fixing them. So now I can solve the puzzle. What multiplies to make -4 and adds to make 0? Well, I think we might actually have factored x squared minus 4 before. It feels familiar. So that's going to be 2 and -2. So I have the 5 on the outside of the bracket, and now I'm splitting the middle term of 0x into plus 2x and minus 2x, and then including the last term. Making this the sum of 2 binomials, I'll be ready to look for GCFs. So x squared and 2x have x as their GCF. The top needs to multiply by x and the bottom by 2. So I can factor out an x. So I have the 5 outside the big brackets, and then inside I have x times x plus 2. Then I look at -2x and -4, and I remember to always take the negative if there's a negative on the first term. So I'm going to take a -2 from each of them. The top multiplies by x and the bottom by a positive 2. So I'm factoring out a -2, leaving an x plus 2 in the parentheses. We're ready for our last step. We have the 5 that's been along for the ride throughout all our work. We have the binomial that they have in common, which gets factored out of the first half and the second half, leaving behind the binomial with the other 2 terms, x minus 2. That is your full factorization. All right, I just walked you through one problem that is very similar to the one coming up next. So I would like you to push pause, try the problem for yourself, and then compare your work to mine when you're ready by pushing play. When I got started on this problem, I actually stopped after a moment. First, I factored out the GCF of 4. And then I got x squared minus 4 left in the parentheses, and I went, wait a minute, didn't we just do that? We did. We just factored x squared minus 4 off on the left. So I didn't go through the whole process again. I just took the part that we know is equal to x squared minus 4, which is x plus 2 times x minus 2, and I wrote it next to that GCF of 4. All right, the two problems that are going to be for homework. Well, one of them is that one. It's very similar to what we've been doing so far. And I've put a hint here that says always look for a GCF in all the terms. You want to make sure you always do that in any factoring problem before you start. The other one that's going to be your homework problem is this one, 2y squared minus 10y plus 8. And I hope you're going to start by looking for a GCF in that one as well. I'd like to do one more with you, though, before I release you to do those two on your own. Let's try this one. So we've got 4x squared minus 26x minus 90. And at first glance, you might feel a little intimidated by the size of those numbers. But I hope you notice that those are all even numbers. So it looks like we could start by factoring out a GCF of 2. If I divide each term by 2, what goes inside the big brackets is 2x squared minus 13x minus 45. Those numbers are still pretty big, but not quite as big as they were at the beginning. And the smaller they can be, the more manageable the problem feels. So let's do the puzzle to figure out how to split the middle terms. We need to ask ourselves what multiplies to make negative 90, because 2 times negative 45 is negative 90. And what adds to make negative 13, because that middle number was a negative 13. Now, I don't know this off the top of my head, so I'm going to have to try a few things. The first thing that comes to mind is 10 and 9, and I know that the bigger one would need to be negative, because a negative times a positive is always a negative. And when I add a negative and a positive together, the sign of the bigger number is the sign I'm going to end up with. Now, when I look at that, I only get negative 1. So that tells me I'm on the right track because I've got the right sign for my number, but I need much bigger, like a much bigger number. I need two numbers that are further apart. So I'm going to look for something bigger than 10. Well, 90 is not divisible by 20. It is divisible by 30. Let me try that. So negative 30 and 3. Well, that gives me negative 27. So I've gone too far. There must be a number somewhere between negative 10 and negative 30 that will go evenly into 90. Well, if it's divisible by 30, it's probably divisible by half of 30, which is 15. So let's see, negative 15 times 6. You might have to check that in your calculator, but that does work out. Negative 15 times 6 would give me negative 90, and when I add them, I get negative 9. So I still haven't quite found it. I'm getting a little closer, but I've got to try something else. There must be something between 15 and 30 that could work. So we need to start getting creative as we look for factors. And if you check some things out, you'll see that negative 18 times positive 5 is negative 13, which is finally the number we're looking for. I let you see all my tries because I want you to realize that no one gets the right pair of numbers on the first try every time. Sometimes we have to look, and keeping track of what you've tried already can help you figure out what things to try next. All right, let's keep going. I have 2 outside the brackets, a 2x squared inside, and I'm splitting negative 13x into negative 18x and positive 5x, and then keeping the negative 45. All right, let's make that a sum of two binomials and look for GCFs. So we have 2x squared minus 2x squared and negative 18x. And that leaves us with a 2x as their GCF, which need to be multiplied by x and negative 9 respectively. So I have the 2 outside the brackets, and inside I'm going to have a 2x factored out from x minus 9. And then I'm going to look at 5x and negative 45. So we have the 5 as their GCF needing to be multiplied by an x and a negative 9. So we factor out the positive 5, leaving behind an x minus 9. So I don't need the big brackets anymore because I'm going to my final factorization. I have the 2 that's been hanging out in front of everything. I have the x minus 9, which is their common binomial factor. And I have the 2x plus 5, which is left behind when we factor that out. All right, you have 2 problems for homework tonight. Please make sure to complete those 2 problems. And when you get done, be sure to post your work in the Google Classroom.